For 19 months, the device Equifax built to watch its own network saw nothing. A single security certificate had expired, and by default, the machine let every connection pass through, uninspected. Behind that blind spot, intruders copied the names, birth dates, and social security numbers of nearly half the population of the United States. Every failure that let them in was documented in advance. How could a company, with every warning in writing, fail to act until half the nation's identities were gone? The truth leaves a paper trail. Let's follow it. Findings of fact. In September 2017, the credit reporting agency Equifax announced one of the largest data breaches in United States history. Personal information belonging to nearly half the population of the United States had been stolen. Names, birth dates, social security numbers. 3 federal investigations reconstructed exactly how it happened. This episode follows their findings, tracing how a single unpatched software flaw let the attackers in, and how a single expired certificate kept the theft invisible for 76 days. The company that never asked your permission. Equifax is a consumer reporting agency. Along with Experian and TransUnion, it is one of the 3 large firms that quietly assemble financial dossiers on almost everyone in the country. Lenders, insurers, and employers pay for those reports. But here is the unusual part. You are not a customer. You never signed up. Consumer reporting agencies gather your information from banks and other sources, and you cannot opt out. Because of that, investigators later noted, these companies carry a heightened responsibility to protect data that people never chose to hand over. By 2017, Equifax held staggering amounts of it. 3 weeks before the breach became public, the company's chief executive boasted that Equifax managed almost 1,200 times the amount of data held in the Library of Congress every single day. Much of that data was the kind that stays with a person. Your social security number, your date of birth, your name, and the history of where you have lived. The House Committee later made the point directly. Social security numbers are used both to identify people and to prove who they are, and an authenticator is only useful if it is kept confidential. This was information people never chose to hand over, and once exposed, it could not simply be reissued the way a payment card can. That growth had a cost that mattered here. Under a chief executive hired in 2005, Equifax expanded aggressively, buying company after company. Each acquisition brought its own systems and its own data, and stitching them together left the company with an information technology environment that its own senior people described as unusually complex. Complexity is not just an inconvenience. Complex systems are harder to inventory, harder to monitor, and harder to patch. And the more of it a company builds itself, the more of it only a handful of people understand. To handle the legal right every American has to dispute an error on their credit file, Equifax ran a system called the Automated Consumer Interview System. Everyone called it ICIS. It was an internet-facing web portal, the place you would go to challenge a mistake on your report and upload documents as evidence. ICIS was old. Equifax had first built it in the 1970s, and it was still running, decades later, on aging servers in a data center in Alpharetta, Georgia. The company's own people described it as extremely complex, custom-built, and modified many times over the years. Only a couple of the original developers were still on staff. This is the door the attackers would use, and to understand how they opened it, we need to talk about a piece of software most people have never heard of, the patch nobody applied. Apache Struts is what engineers call middleware. It is a free, widely used framework that sits between an operating system and a web application and helps the application run. Thousands of organizations use it. Equifax used it inside ASIS. On the 7th of March, 2017, the group that maintains Apache struts publicly announced a serious flaw. It was given a formal identifier, CVE 2017-5638. The National Vulnerability Database, run by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, scored it. At the time, on a scale that tops out at 10.0, this flaw scored a 10.0, the maximum. Here is what that score meant in plain terms. An attacker could exploit it remotely, over the network. The attack was low in complexity, meaning it was easy to do. It required no password and no action from any user, and a successful attack could hand over complete control of the affected system. Exploit code and instructions were already circulating online. The Senate found they had been available 4 days before the patch itself was released. Investigators noted that people with only basic computer skills, not just skilled hackers, could follow published instructions and exploit it. On the 8th of March, the Department of Homeland Security warned Equifax directly to patch it. The next day, Equifax's own threat management team emailed the alert to more than 400 employees. The instruction was explicit. This was rated critical. It required patching within 48 hours, as the company's own security policy demanded. The patch existed. The warning was delivered. The deadline was set, and the copy of Apache struts running inside ASIS was never patched. Not in 48 hours, not for months. Investigators confirmed it stayed vulnerable until the day the breach was discovered. Now to understand why, we have to look at how Equifax decided who was responsible for anything. Nobody's job. Equifax had a patch management policy on paper. It named roles. A business owner would approve downtime. A system owner would apply the patch. An application owner would confirm it was done properly. It looked orderly, but when congressional investigators asked who actually held those roles for ASIS, they could not get an answer. The senior executive nominally over the system testified that those people were never designated and that he could only guess who the system owner might be. The policy defined jobs. The company had never assigned them to people, and so when the alert went out to 400 recipients, it went to everyone and to no one. There was a second safety net that failed. On the 15th of March, Equifax scanned its externally facing systems to find any vulnerable struts. The scans came back clean. They were wrong. The interim security chief later explained that a scan had been run against the wrong directory, missing the place where struts actually lived. And a deeper problem sat underneath. Equifax did not have a complete inventory of its own software. If you do not know a piece of software is running on your network, you cannot know to patch it. In the Senate's words, if a vulnerability cannot be found, it cannot be patched. None of this was a surprise to the company. 2 years earlier, in 2015, Equifax had audited its own patching. The audit was damning. It found a backlog of more than 8,500 unpatched vulnerabilities. It found that the company relied on what the auditors called an honor system, where staff were simply trusted to have installed patches with no reliable check. And it found there was no comprehensive inventory of technology assets. The audit came with deadlines to fix these things. Many passed unmet, and Equifax never conducted a follow-up audit at all. There is a quiet, damning comparison in the Senate's report. Equifax's two largest competitors, Experian and TransUnion, faced the very same Apache struts flaw. Both maintained inventories of their technology assets, and both moved quickly to find where the vulnerable software was running. TransUnion began patching within days. Experian found its vulnerable server, took it offline, and patched it. The difference was not the threat. The difference was knowing what you own, the intrusion nobody could see. On the 13th of May, 2017, Attackers used the unpatched struts floor to enter the ASIS environment. Once inside, they installed what are called web shells. A web shell is a small malicious script left on a compromised server that acts as a hidden backdoor, letting an intruder return and issue commands at will. Over the course of the attack, investigators counted around 30 of them. There was a tool that could have caught this. It is called file integrity monitoring. Its job is to watch important system files and raise an alarm when something changes, such as a new script appearing where none should be. Equifax did not have file integrity monitoring enabled on ASIS, so the web shells were planted in silence. Next, the attackers found a file sitting on a shared drive that contained usernames and passwords. They were stored in plain text, unencrypted. With those credentials in hand, the intruders could move, and here they were helped by a design choice. To do its actual job, ASIS needed to reach only 3 databases, but it had not been walled off or segmented from the rest of the network. The databases all sat together, reachable, so the attackers used the stolen credentials to step out of ASIS and into 48 unrelated databases. Then they went looking. Investigators determined the attackers ran roughly 9,000 database queries. They would ask a table what kind of information it held, and when they found personal data, they pulled it. Of those 9,000 queries, 265 located unencrypted personal information. They compressed it, and they carried it out of the network in small pieces. It is worth pausing on the segmentation point because it is easy to underrate. Segmentation is the practice of dividing a network into compartments so that breaking into one does not grant access to all the others. It is the digital equivalent of watertight bulkheads in a ship's hull. A leak in one compartment should not sink the vessel. Investigators found that Equifax's legacy environment, including ASIS, lacked that compartmentalization. Once the attackers were inside the first room, there were no walls to stop them walking through the rest of the house. Mandiant, the forensic firm, told Congress plainly that proper segmentation would have mitigated how much data the intruders could reach. There was also a limit that did not exist. Normal use of these databases involves a predictable, modest number of queries. 9,000 queries from a single path is not normal, but Equifax had placed no restriction on how many queries could be run and no alarm on an abnormal volume, so the flood of requests, each one quietly harvesting records, simply blended into the background of ordinary network activity. Every step here built on the last. An unpatched door, no alarm on the files, passwords in the open, no internal walls, no cap on the queries. Any one of these, addressed, might have blunted the attack. Together, they made it easy, and still, none of it had been detected. To understand why the theft could continue for 76 days, we come to the certificate, the dead certificate. To watch for attacks, Equifax had placed a special device in front of the ASIS system. It was called an SSL visibility appliance. Its purpose was simple but essential. Most web traffic today is encrypted, which is good for privacy but a problem for security tools, because a tool cannot inspect what it cannot read. So this appliance would decrypt the traffic, hand it to the intrusion detection and prevention systems for inspection, and then pass it along. The intrusion detection systems sat behind it. Everything depended on the appliance being able to do its work. To decrypt traffic, the appliance needed a valid digital certificate. Think of the certificate as the key that lets the device open the envelope and read what is inside. Certificates do not last forever. They have an expiry date, and when they expire, they must be renewed. If the certificate expires, the device can no longer read the traffic. The certificate on the appliance watching ASIS had expired, and when it expired, the appliance did not sound an alarm or block traffic. By default, It simply let the encrypted traffic flow straight through to ASIS, uninspected. The security systems behind it went blind, and nothing announced that they had. How long had it been blind? Here, the official reports quietly disagree, and it is worth being honest about that. The House Committee, working from Equifax's own documents, found the certificate had expired on the 31st of January, 2016. That is 19 months before the breach was discovered. The Government Accountability Office said about 10 months. The Senate Subcommittee said about 8. They differ on the length. They agree completely on the consequence. Throughout the entire intrusion, the traffic was not being inspected. This was not a hidden flaw. In January of 2017, an internal Equifax tracker had warned that its visibility devices were missing certificates, limiting visibility to web-based attacks. Security staff had said in writing that the company needed to decide who owned the care and feeding of its certificates. At the time of the breach, Equifax had allowed at least 324 certificates to expire. 79 of them were on devices monitoring business-critical systems, so the picture is complete. The intruders came and went through encrypted channels that no one was reading, because the reader had a dead key on a device everyone had forgotten to maintain. There is a detail here that captures the whole failure in miniature. This was not a subtle, invisible defect. The appliance was doing exactly what an unmaintained appliance does. The certificate had a printed expiry date, like the date on a carton of milk. Someone simply had to renew it, and no one owned the job of doing so. The security depended not on sophisticated engineering, but on routine upkeep, and the routine had lapsed. On the 29th of July, 2017, at 9 in the evening, the team finally uploaded a batch of 67 fresh certificates. Inspection resumed, and this is the part worth sitting with. Almost immediately, they detected a suspicious request from an internet address in China, a country where Equifax does not operate. The very first thing the restored system did was reveal a theft that had been running for weeks. They blocked the address. The next day, seeing still more suspicious activity, they took ASIS offline. The attack ended the moment the system went dark. The intruders had not been stopped by a defense. They had been stopped by a light being switched back on after the alarm. On the 31st of July, the Chief Information Officer told the Chief Executive there had been an incident. On the 2nd of August, Equifax brought in the forensic firm Mandiant, retained outside lawyers, and notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It took weeks to work out the scale, in part because Equifax did not have a list of who owned which databases, and some of the data inside them was not clearly identifiable. On the 7th of September, Equifax told the public. The first figure was 143 million consumers. It grew. In October, forensic work added 2.5 million more. The following March, Equifax identified around 2.4 million additional people whose partial driver's license details had been taken, bringing the House Committee's final count to 148 million. The later settlement framed the figure as roughly 147 million. Attackers had also accessed about 209,000 payment card numbers and around 182,000 dispute documents that consumers had uploaded as evidence. The public response went badly. Equifax stood up a dedicated website to let people check whether they were affected and sign up for protection. It was overwhelmed almost at once. One senior executive later described the problem with an honest analogy. The company, he said, had filled a bathtub of incoming requests, but could only let them drip through its own systems one at a time, so the backlog grew faster than it could be cleared. Some people who tried to sign up received errors. Others got one answer on their computer and a different answer on their phone. And the site's web address was so generic that a security researcher built a convincing lookalike, after which Equifax's own social media account, by mistake, directed people to the fake site for nearly 2 weeks. The call centers, staffed in a hurry with 1,500 temporary workers, could not keep up either. Within weeks, the chief information officer and chief security officer retired. The chief executive retired soon after. And then came a moment the House committee singled out. On the 2nd of October, Equifax fired a senior vice president, Graham Payne, saying he had failed to forward an email, the March alert about the patch. The next day, the former chief executive testified before Congress and described the breach as, in part, a human error, a single person who did not communicate the need to patch. The investigators did not accept that framing. Payne was one of more than 400 people who received that alert. He had no duty under the policy to forward it. He called the account a gross simplification of a deeply complex failure, and the House report described the firing as a public relations motivated maneuver that seemed gratuitous against the facts. We note this carefully because the record is clear that this was a systemic failure, not one forgotten email. Nail hands dumb. As for who the attackers were, in February of 2020, the Department of Justice unsealed an indictment charging 4 members of the Chinese People's Liberation Army from a unit called the 54th Research Institute. Prosecutors alleged they routed their activity through roughly 34 servers in nearly 20 countries to hide their location. These are charges. The case has not gone to trial, and an indictment is not a conviction. What the record asks us to learn. It is tempting to file this away as a story about hackers. The official record points somewhere less dramatic and more useful. The lesson the investigators kept returning to is that Equifax was not defeated by a clever adversary. It was defeated by things it already knew and had already written down. A patch it had 48 hours to apply. An asset inventory it had been told for 2 years it lacked. A certificate it had flagged in its own tracker as expiring. Competitors facing the identical threat closed the door in days because they knew what they owned. The tools were largely present. What failed was people and process, the boring work of assigning responsibility and finishing what you start. The consequences reshaped the company and the rules around it. Equifax elevated its chief information security officer to report directly to the chief executive, so security would no longer sit several levels down. It carried out all 11 of the forensic firm's recommendations, from network segmentation to file integrity monitoring to properly inspecting encrypted traffic. In July of 2019, it settled with the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and 50 states and territories for at least $575 million, potentially up to $700 million. Regulators alleged the company had violated the Safeguards Rule, the federal requirement that financial firms maintain a real information security program, and Congress, in its report, urged broader changes, including reducing the country's reliance on the Social Security number as both an identifier and a password. An authenticator, the committee observed, is only useful if it is kept confidential, and the Social Security numbers of nearly half the country were confidential no longer. The enduring point is quieter than any of that. Security is rarely lost in a single dramatic instant. It is lost slowly, in postponed maintenance and unassigned ownership, until one ordinary night someone renews a certificate and finally sees what has been happening all along. This has been Findings of Fact. Thanks for watching. Every source is linked in the description if you want to dig deeper. If we got anything wrong, let us know in the comments. We'll pin the correction. And subscribe so the next investigation finds you. Or keep watching. The next one's on screen now.